Dames en heren, goedenavond. Hier in de Haagse Bibliotheek op een vrijdagavond voor een nieuwe aflevering van Be Unlimited, het debat- en lezingenprogramma van de Haagse Bibliotheek en Writers Unlimited. Ik ben Patrick van der Heijden, programmamaker. We brengen vandaag Franklin Foer voor u, speciaal overgevlogen uit de Verenigde Staten. Zijn nieuwste boek World Without Mind is vertaald als Ontzielde, wereld. En over die ontzielde wereld en misschien ook zelfs wel wat daaraan te doen. Daarover gaan we Franklin aan het woord voeren. We dachten van, nou, we kunnen hem natuurlijk alleen op een podium zetten, maar misschien is het wel leuker om hem eens even goed te laten ondervragen. Dat hebben we aan Eric Smit gevraagd. Daar zijn we heel blij mee dat hij dat wil doen. Eric Smit is onderzoeksjournalist en eigenaar van Follow the Money. Als u dat niet kent, ga het vooral volgen en wordt ook betalend abonnee. Want anders kunnen dat soort platforms niet meer bestaan. Ze gaan 1,5 uur met elkaar praten. Er zal ruimte zijn voor uw inbreng. En na afloop is het de gelegenheid om bij de heren nog even te spreken, maar ook om een boek te kopen en er meteen een prachtige handtekening van Franklin in te laten zitten. Ik wens u een hele fijne avond.
Hello, everybody. Goedenavond, iedereen. Well, it's obviously in English tonight, so
Thank
hi,
you.
Franklin. Yeah. How's your Dutch
Yeah.
going on so far?
I have Google Translate, so
Yeah,
what
okay,
could
that's
go
great.
wrong?
Yeah. Well, let's start with Google Translate then. Well, welcome in the Netherlands, and welcome here at our table, and welcome you, everybody. It's nice that you're all here. And we're obviously going to discuss this book. I've read it. Are there already people in the zaal that have read it?
Don't all raise your hands.
No. Oh, it's just to come out in the Netherlands.
Right, exactly.
So that's why.
That's the point. We're marketing here.
And as a matter of fact, you have to. What we do is after put your autograph in here.
Thank you.
World Without Mind: The Existential Threat of Big Tech. That's quite a title. As an investigative journalist, Franklin Foer is used to hold those in power accountable. And that's exactly what he does in this book, World Without Mind, The Existential Threat of Big Tech. In 274 pages, he's taking on the most powerful companies in the world. Amazon, Google, Facebook. Even more so, he is denouncing the complete Silicon Valley. It is, however, not a piece of muckraking that Foer wrote. One could call it a pamphlet. A highly spirited indictment of the world of big tech that threatens the essence of our democracy, our freedom. Foer writes about the likes of Google's Larry Page, a high-tech evangelist, Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, a hypocrite who wages war against free will. And there's that monster called Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon. This man, Bezos, and his friends from the Valley, with their opaque algorithms, are trying to cause the death of independent authors and professional journalists. People like us. They're bastards. However, ranked 4 on my Google search, there goes the offer on Amazon bookstore, 4, ranked 4. And there's this quotation on Amazon, on the enemy's website. Franklin Foer reveals the existential threat posed by big tech, and in his brilliant polemic gives us the toolkit to fight their pervasive influence. Well, there you go.
I think my publisher actually wrote that blurb, and then it automatically gets posted to Amazon.
So what's the problem? What are these companies doing exactly to piss you off?
Right. So, first of all, thank you, and I'm not that harsh. I'm a much softer person than you portray in your introduction, and I hope my book my book is angry. There's no doubt about it. But I also tried to write the book not so much to tear down as much to try to defend a certain idea about what it means to be a thinking person, what it means to live a life of contemplation, and the ways in which these companies ultimately threaten the possibility of that type of life. I'm going to start.
That's something to become angry about, you know.
I think it's worth being angry about it, and I think let's just start. Let's just start with something that I think everyone in the audience can surely relate to, which is their phone. We were driving here this afternoon from Amsterdam, and I'd actually never done this experiment before, where I just stared out of the passenger window and I looked at everybody who was going down the road, and it was one car after another where people were driving like this. And it's a miracle that we don't have mass tragedies on the road every day. But
people behind the steering wheel.
Behind the steering wheel, and I actually, so it was traffic was really slow, and so people probably felt safer just kind of going like this. But look, we all know that feeling. That person I'm describing is us, because we all have this attachment to this device that when it sits in another room, it feels as if your limb has been severed. And I don't want to ask a personal question of you, Eric, but do you sleep with your iPhone? I mean, there are so many people who actually sleep with their phones. I sleep with.
Well, it's next to my bed.
Well, that's your sleep.
Yeah.
You're not.
Yeah.
You're not having intercourse with your phone,
No,
but it's like it's.
Maybe
maybe you're watching pornography on it, but
war movies.
Or movies.
Usually.
No, but so the point is though is that we're attached to these phones, and it's not an accident. I mean, it's not an accident that the phones provide us with things
because they're ususeful. They're handy.
They're incredibly useful, but they've also been reverse engineered in order to addict you. So as we've been sitting here, your phone has flashed a couple times with notifications, and that it's a device for trying to capture your attention constantly, and or at least people are exploiting it to capture your attention constantly. And it's by design. There's a metaphor I use in the book, which is to food. That in the 50s and 60s, we had this revolution in food where you had processed foods, introduced TV dinners, and at the time they seemed incredible. That they were really efficient. That you didn't have to go to the store every day. You didn't have pots and pans to clean up. And then you wake up many years later and you say, "Holy cow! That stuff was engineered to make us fat. It was engineered.
Yeah.
It was loaded with fat, sugar, and salt to addict us, and it completely transformed the economics of agriculture, leading to new concentrations of power." And my book really is making an argument that the same thing that happened to the things that we ingest through our mouth are happening to the things that we ingest through our mind, and that there's a threat that will pay the same sort of cost that we paid with our waistline, and will become mentally obese, and maybe even something worse than that.
But I mean, there's a lot to see on this. There's also Netflix, and there's some great documentaries on Netflix, and that's why I have my phone next to my bed. So before I go to sleep, I just watch this part of it. And there's so much quality content. So we get into. So isn't that great? Isn't that?
It is great. And in fact, even as I have my problems with Google, or my problems with Apple, or my problems with Facebook, I'm not saying go hurl your phone into the sea and go back to being a hunter-gatherer where you don't need to, Google the location for the nearest restaurant or all. Google is one of the great achievements of human creativity. The iPhone is an incredible feat of civilization. And the point in my book is that we can benefit from these technologies, but we need to shape them so that they serve human beings. One example, a parallel perhaps, is the automobile. That when automobiles first existed, they were very, very efficient from getting us from point A to point B, much better than horses. Smell maybe marginally better too. See? We'll just keep providing an object lesson in my thesis as we go along. But we started to create rules so that, because cars, when they invented, mowed people down as they crossed the street. There were no crosswalks. There were no speed limits. There were no stop signs. There were no safety belts. There were no fuel efficiency standards. And so we tried.
Sounds like an AC/DC song. This.
So we tried to harness this amazing invention to be so that we could master it, and so that it would benefit us as a species.
So, but let's take us back first to your start of your career, and actually the whole family Foer.
Okay.
Because we know obviously that you are a successful writer, because we have a book here of yours. But you have two brothers who are also insanely successful. Mention your brother Joshua, who made that bestseller Moonwalking with Einstein, and your other brother Jonathan Safran, with that extremely important and successful book, extremely loud and incredibly close. You probably all know those books. And your first book, How Soccer Explains the World, all international successes. How does that happen in one family? I mean,
well, I can let me. I'm not really quite sure, and I actually, it's a little bit of it's a difficult question for me to answer, in part because I look at them as like. Little
competition?
Little schmucks who would bother me when I was trying to do my homework. But also, let me just say one thing. I mean, first of all, I watched my fair share of television growing up. It's not like we sat around practicing violin and playing chess. But my parents did one thing which I think was very shrewd, and maybe even relates to the thesis of my book, which was that they gave us a credit card, and they said, "This is purely for emergency purposes. I don't want you to go to the fast food restaurant and buy anything with that. I don't want you to go to the store to buy a sweatshirt. But there's one place where you're allowed to spend as much as you want, which was our neighborhood bookstore." And so,
does it still exist?
It still exists. It's called Politics and Prose. It's a really beautiful place. We develop. Everybody wants to consume, and we were given the ability to buy books, which works well until my brother Jonathan figured out that art books were incredibly expensive, and so that became his form of rebellion. He just abused the system.
But when did you start writing yourself?
I started right after college. I went the year I graduated college. I moved to Seattle to work for a magazine called Slate, which is also still in existence. Yeah. It's
a Microsoft subsidiary, wasn't it?
It was started by Microsoft, and it was going to become the first big internet magazine. And Microsoft actually, when I moved to Seattle, Microsoft had created a special campus for its media. It created a women's magazine, which was called Underwire, which is a terrible name.
Underwire.
They created a city magazine called Sidewalk, which was going to try to be like Craigslist to try to capture that kind of classified advertising. They had an auto magazine, and so I moved out there, and it was so exciting, this idea of creating journalism for the internet, because nobody knew what the rules were.
But did you already write at college or at university?
A little bit.
A little bit. Yeah. But you came in with the idea, I want to become a journalist now. I want to be part of or did you want to be part of the online world?
No, I wanted to be. I wanted to be an intellectual. I mean, that was kind of my dream. Was that like a lot of other.
Your name was going to be on a front page, or in this case, a front page of a web zine.
Well, it was. I liked the idea of argument. I liked the idea of polemic. I liked the idea of being engaged in the world, and in a fairly romantic sort of way. And so that was the dream that I kind of set out to follow.
So not as an investigative journalist, which you turned out also.
Well, I do some investigative journalism, but I actually. I feel like I stumbled into investigative journalism as a sideline, and it kind of grows out of. I mean, you do this as well, and I don't know. And it sounds like you didn't start off intending to be an investigative journalist either. And
yeah, I didn't start out with the idea to become an intellectual.
But
Probably not.
but what I found is that I would get outraged at something or another, and I'd start to try to figure it out, and it always felt to me like there was a more, whereas I've never worked for a newspaper, and so I've never had to work in a newsroom type of environment with investigation. I've had a longer leash, as they say, to do investigative journalism in magazines or at Slate, where it was just easier to follow things that maybe other people couldn't convince their editors who were maybe more cautious to pursue. And so that's kind of, I saw an opportunity there, and it's also fun.
You could dig into stuff.
It's exhilarating. I mean, journalism is great because you get to follow your curiosity. And investigative journalism is incredible because the rush of figuring out information that nobody else has really been able to figure out it's a narcotic.
Indeed it is. So when did the narcotic of Amazon or this particular story or Silicon Valley hit you for the first time? When did you first tasted it?
So I had published...
How long ago?
Belatedly. I was not... When Google started, it was... I still use Google a hell of a lot, and I use my phone a lot. But I treated them probably the same way that most people treated them. I said, these are incredible companies. These are incredible inventions. I want the next thing. I want the next phone. I want the Kindle, because these seem incredibly efficient. They seem great. But there was a moment in 2014 when Amazon's not a company I think that the Dutch really kind of have the experience that kind of Americans have, where it's
try to explain to us what the mere size of Amazon is.
Yeah. So in Amazon started off as a bookstore, much the way that is it Bull? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Bull.com we have here.
As a bookstore, but Amazon started off as a bookstore, and then it started to find its way into other aspects of retail, and then it started to call itself an everything store. And then being an everything store that sold, basically every element in this room you could purchase on Amazon cheaper than you can find it anywhere else on the internet. Cheap, in fact, you can get it faster than anywhere else on the internet. And so, the lights, the table, the stand. If you wanted to replace that wheel, you could buy it all at Amazon, and it would be delivered to you tomorrow at the lowest possible price. What could be wrong with that? Well, let me tell my story, and then we can get into what could be wrong with that. So in 2014, Amazon began to renegotiate its contract with Hachette, which is a big French publishing conglomerate. And Amazon said, you depend on us, Hachette, for book sales. 70% of book sales. Siri is listening, by the way.
Shit. Shut up.
Siri, unfortunately, can't provide the answer to the problem that I'm about to describe. So Amazon said to Hachette, we control 70% of the ebook market in the United States, and we're going to set the price, and we're going to set the terms, and we're going to take a whack out of your profit that you've never experienced before. And Hachette said, no, we can't afford to abide by the terms of your contract. And so a very public battle ensued. And Amazon began to throw around its power. It started to really harshly treat Hachette in the course of this negotiation. So if you were a Hachette author, Amazon took the buy button off of your page on its website. Or in some instances, they tried to redirect searches to other products that were not Hachette products. And I hit me where I live. I felt personally kind of under attack. And journalists are incredible narcissist, right? If there's some problem in the economy, it kind of has to affect us first before we start to truly understand it. And so I started to become active, and I tried to figure out this problem.
And that's actually the first time really that it struck you that.
Well, then I wrote an article. I wrote an essay. It was called "Amazon Must Be Stopped," and Amazon. As soon as I wrote this essay, Amazon sent a letter to my boss and to the people who sold ads at the magazine where I worked, and they said, because of your cover story, Amazon is no longer advertising with you, and we're canceling this campaign that was set to begin next week. Sincerely, the Amazon team. And so not only had I written the story, in the immediate aftermath, I felt like they walked in and they confirmed my thesis, which was that Amazon was acquiring more and more size. And we have this tradition in the United States of being afraid of monopoly. Why? If you go back to Thomas Jefferson or the people who founded the Republic, the reason they were afraid of monopoly is that they worried that it would start to distort democracy. And here was a very, very vivid case study, almost more vivid than Thomas Jefferson could have ever imagined, where a company that works in the realm of ideas, that disseminates books, that was saying, you know what, we don't like to be criticized and we're going to punish critics. And so how can you have a free market of ideas? How can you have a free flow of ideas if ideas are being punished by a bullying monopoly?
So how did that battle turn out between you and your magazine? Was New Republic?
Right. Well, I don't know if we need to back into this story.
Completely, no, but to give an idea.
Yeah. So I worked at a little magazine called The New Republic, which was it is based in Washington. Actually, I think it's now based in New York. But when you'll see, I got fired in the end, and so I really stopped caring about what the hell happened to it. But I just gave away the plot. So I worked for this little magazine that was 100 years old and was this incredible combination of writing about politics and culture and policy, and it really prided itself on being contrarian. We were a liberal.
So you were contrarian. You published this article. You took on this big monopolist.
Right.
Which is it's great. So your owner was really happy with you.
So we need to we should back into the story about my owner, who was a guy who I met called Chris Hughes, and when I met him, he was 28 years old and worth $700 million at the time, because he'd been Mark Zuckerberg's roommate at Harvard and one of the 3 founders of Facebook. And initially, I thought he was a savior of journalism, because he came in, he said, I'm committed to serious things. I have money that I'm willing to spend and invest in those serious things. And I know you guys have struggled to figure out this internet, but I invented social media, so I can help you achieve a dignified solution to all the things that ail journalism. And it started out thrilling and great. But then there was a moment about a year and a half into my working with Chris Hughes where he said, look, we're spending too much money, which admittedly was my fault. I was the one.
Because of the Amazon attack.
No. Sorry. So, you want me to just get to the punchline of the Amazon story?
No. You tell me.
Okay.
Sorry.
No. So Chris said we need more revenue, and this is unrelated to Amazon. So Chris said we need more revenue, and he said we need more revenue. But the only way to get revenue is to grow web traffic. The only way to grow web traffic is to create content that will work on Facebook. And I said, okay, fine. And he said, look, I invented Facebook. I know how to do this. And it didn't seem like a bad deal to me at the beginning, because he was still subsidizing journalism that I cared about. At the same time, we were having to produce what he called snackable content.
Yeah.
Snackable content's a pretty terrible term.
For somebody who wants to be an intellectual.
Right.
Snackable intellectual pieces. Well, why not?
Well, why not? Let me tell you why not. So the problem is that we'd prided ourselves before on being highly original, being contrarian. And so what did it mean to be snackable content? It meant, in a sense, giving people something that they craved, like a bag of Doritos, right? An intellectual version of a bag of Doritos. And that's what Facebook is kind of expert in a lot of ways in providing people, is that Facebook kind of knows what you want because they've collected all this data about everything you've read, everywhere you've traveled, everything you buy. They have this picture of the inside of your head. They know the things that give you pleasure, the things that give you anxiety.
They know my family, they know everything about me. They know more about me, as a matter of fact, than I do.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Have you ever had a moment where you've been like, wow, how did they know that?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's true. They know your political preference. They know your religious sensibility. They probably know. They could probably figure out who your college girlfriends were. They could probably figure out lots of things about you that you didn't think that they could find out, and things about you, as you say, that that know you better than you know yourself. In fact, Eric Smit, who is the chairman of Google, has said Google can predict where you're going to be 24 hours from now with a fairly high degree of certainty because they know your habits, they know the patterns of your life, and so they're able to anticipate things. Mm-hmm. So just to return to Chris Hughes.
Chris Hughes, yes. Who was your boss and who was confronted with the idea of making more money with intellectual stuff in snackable pieces,
right? And
which you opposed, obviously.
Well, I didn't actually oppose initially. I was all for trying to find a way to make it work. Like I wanted us to be successful because as long as we got to write pieces about the Rohingya or do quirky profiles that involved expensive narrative journalistic reporting, I'm willing to make I'm not an unreasonable guy. I know the way the world works. Is that, sometimes you got to apply the Hollywood studio model where you have to produce some popcorn movies in order to finance the Oscar winners that you want to produce. And so I wasn't totally opposed to it. It didn't strike me as the right thing to do. It struck me as a distortion of our fundamental character. But it only over time was I able to see the ways in which our increasing dependence on Facebook was really intellectually incapacitating. That
what do you mean by that? Intellectually say that again.
Incapacitating.
Incapacitating.
So with
what does happen in that process?
So with Facebook, you're basically constantly trying to figure out what's going to be popular, and you're trying to collect as much data about your readers and about what's popular in order to hit that formula. And so we would end up repeating ourselves. So you would end up, if one thing worked, you'd end up doing it 2 or 3 or 4 times until it was exhausted and people no longer stopped responding to it because you wanted results. I became addicted to data and to analytics. If you go into, Follow the Money probably doesn't have a computer screen. You don't really care. You don't really obsess over Facebook in that sort of way.
Not at Facebook, but Google Analytics. You can have a screen, and our publisher is somewhere here, and he has his own screen with the data and all the articles.
Right.
And
but I don't know what most Dutch newspapers are like. But if you walk into the Washington Post or even the New York Times, there's a big screen sitting over the newsroom, and it's showing what's popular at any given moment, and it's showing where traffic is coming from, if it's coming from Facebook or Google or your homepage. And I had something on my phone called Chartbeat, which was it was like a speedometer on a car that could show how popular a story was at any given moment, and it became an obsession of mine. I think most journalists really like, they want to be popular, right? Everybody wants readers. There's nothing wrong with wanting readers. I wasn't popular in high school, so I like being popular on the internet. And so I would wake up and I would see the popularity of our stories in the morning, first thing when I checked my phone, then when I got my coffee, and then over the course of the day, I would just look at it all the time, and it gets into your head. Once you see, like I said, once you see what works, you can't help but want to produce that and to repeat the formula. And politically, so I told you the New Republic had been a magazine that was contrarian. So we published things from the right, we published things from the left, we published things that we intended to piss off our readers because that was the spirit of the thing. And suddenly I found myself, like, I knew that if I just produced things for the left, then I had a better chance of being successful. And so I found myself dragging the magazine ideologically and constraining us and kind of situating us more and more within what they call the filter bubble, where you're insulating yourself ideologically. And to me, it became, like, looking back, I could say, this is a bigger problem. It wasn't just me at the New Republic. This is journalism, but it's also everybody in this room who becomes dependent on these platforms, because it's the values of these platforms end up becoming internalized by everybody who depends on those platforms.
And that's when you actually realized that things were going wrong.
Right. So I ended up.
Did you make a decision then when you sort of?
It wasn't so noble as you describe. I mean, I was pushing back against Chris. I was arguing it wasn't working out, and I was unhappy having to live in the system. But I also had a lot of people who
depending on me,
and so I didn't rush to be noble. I didn't rush to be romantic about this. And then he hired a CEO from Yahoo, who he was a guy who's actually named Guy, which is confusing. So the guy called Guy came in, and I knew he was going to fire me, so I basically quit when Chris had hired somebody else to be the editor of the New Republic, who was going around offering people jobs at the New Republic, and Chris didn't know that I knew, so I kind of ambushed him and said I quit. And then a bunch of other people quit the magazine too, and it became a story in American media about how this golden boy for Silicon Valley was abusing a journalistic institution.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't as simple as that, but that's how it played out.
But now your book is the mentality of the Silicon Valley is all abundant, and the ideas of the Silicon Valley are taken apart, and you go way back to really where it all started. But let me try to ask you that: aren't these people from the Valley not like really sweet vegetarian kind of hippies, which do really want to make a better place on Earth and everything? What is wrong with that Valley? What creates people like Zuckerberg or the people that create systems that you start to revolt to?
So I think you're correct that they're actually idealistic people. That Mark Zuckerberg talks about wanting to connect the world, and I think he sincerely believes that's what he's doing. Or Larry Page is an idealist in a very different sort of way, which is that he views human beings as being, you guys are just code. You're piles of algorithms. And so his job is to try to help you advance to the next stage of human evolution, which is to make you cyborg. So if you merge with that machine, you're just becoming a better species, and he's helping preside over that development. But one thing that's totally...
Is that typical Silicon Valley, that attitude? I mean... wasn't there this guy, Dr. Frankenstein, who tried to do that same sort of thing?
Yeah.
Or isn't it, sort of a very human-like ambition to become immortal or to become a machine or whatever?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. No, I totally agree that in a way that represents a continuation of one of the oldest dreams in Western civilization, which is that the human body is a bad piece of hardware. Human beings, we fall apart. We can't. There's no way to take human being version 1.0 and upgrade it to version 2.0 and keep upgrading it forever and ever. We get replaced. And so if you can find a way to liberate the human mind from the human body, then we can live forever.
And that's what you find in the valley, that particular spirit, you think?
It's really palpable. It's something. There's a movement. There's actually a theory. It's called the singularity, which is a concept that comes from astrophysics, and it got popularized ultimately by an engineer called Ray Kurzweil, who has since gone to work for Google. And Kurzweil has this theory that, all right, things seem to be changing really quickly right now. There's a lot of innovation, but you're completely wrong. Like, we're really in the early stages of innovation, and there's going to be a moment, and actually maybe it just happened yesterday, where artificial intelligence is able to create artificial intelligence, where machines are able to build machines, where they become smarter than we are. And that may sound like a science fiction nightmare to you, but to him, it's the gateway to nirvana, to this messianic dream where at that moment, he imagines we're gonna upload our brains to machines. We'll be able to live forever. Life will be heavenly. All of our material.
But that's Ray Kurzweil. Is that vision that, well, one might say theological conviction, is that embraced all through the valley, or is it?
No, it's not. I think Larry Page seems to share that vision. Larry Page is really interesting. His dad was a pioneer in artificial intelligence in the 1960s, and it's something that he grew up with. And I think that you read every biography of Larry Page, and it talks about how his dad instructed him with theological conviction. And when it comes to the singularity, Google actually, they didn't just hire Kurzweil, they subsidized something called Singularity University. It's in Silicon Valley. And Larry Page has said this is the place, if he could go to school, he would want to go to school. And a lot of their missions are kind of singularity-oriented missions. So, for instance, Google has a life sciences company that's committed to trying to achieve immortality. Larry Page said,
but that's great, immortality. Don't you want to become immortal? I mean,
no.
No?
No.
Why not?
I actually, and this kind of ties back to a broader concern I have about the glorious future that Silicon Valley promises us, which is actually being afraid of death is hugely important to the way that we function as human beings. That we try to be moral. What enforces morality? Well, I think we're afraid of dying bad people. What causes us to think big thoughts and to be ambitious and to get up each morning to try to do something new? It's really, we worry about what our life will be judged at the end of days. And so, and also, there are the other questions about the pure moral questions about what we do when we kind of suck up opportunity and resources for ourselves in our pursuit of this vainglorious dream of living forever and ever. But just kind of to tie it back to Silicon Valley, there is this kind of dream of abundance, this dream that we're just about to turn the corner into this wonderful new sort of world. And so you see it. One other theory that Larry Page believes in that's also very popular in Silicon Valley is one of abundance, that they view scarcity as kind of a human problem, that we live in this world where we're competing for resources, but really, if you just engineered everything in the right sort of way, and you put engineers in charge, if you put Silicon Valley in charge, then we could make rational decisions about the allocation of resources. And then there would be no more hunger, no more poverty, no more war. And it's really just
So that's a world where we can, order endlessly the greatest experiences for basically $0 because there's abundance.
Right.
So,
Well, this is like,
and we live forever. So
Yeah.
it will be one eternal orgy, basically, sort of thing.
Well, actually, Ray Kurzweil says that sex will be better once we transcend our physical body. I don't quite understand how that'll work, but I'm serious. That's in his book. But let's. Can I just double back to Amazon, because I think that this is we're getting to kind of the metaphysical core of Silicon Valley. And I do think it has a metaphysical core.
Because I'm very curious about that metaphysical core. What is it? What is it that it connects it to Amazon, to Jeff Bezos, the CEO and founder of Amazon?
Well, I mean, I don't think Jeff Bezos believes in the singularity, or he believes in technology in the same sort of way that Larry Page quite believes in it. And it's actually harder to tell. So when I wrote this book, I just sat and I watched YouTube of Larry Page and Mark Zuckerberg talking, and I thought, my God, they're saying, all right, sure, they're saying things about the next iPhone or the next version of Facebook.
Zuckerberg is a believer.
Yeah, Zuckerberg is a believer. They say these things about the next version, but they're really saying profoundly interesting things about human nature and human society, and we can ignore what they're saying as blather, as just empty words that they say to make themselves feel better. Or we can take them seriously and say, you have this grand vision of what human nature is, what human beings should become. I'm going to pay attention to you and listen to you and take you seriously. One thing that's happening in Silicon Valley now, while I'm going along this apocalyptic track, they talk about Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk are obsessed with this idea of human-machine interface. So it's really, everything in Silicon Valley is about efficiency and making the world more frictionless is the term. And so Zuckerberg and Musk want there to be a way that you can communicate with your machines without typing, where the machines are reading your brain. And it sounds ridiculous to me. I feel like a fool describing this to you, but it's actually, they're investing a lot of money in laboratories that are trying to develop this technology. And the pictures you see illustrating it look ridiculous, where there's a guy with a cap on his head and all sorts of wires coming out of it, and it looks like the Mel Brooks version of Frankenstein, but Frankenstein, and so I don't believe it. But then again, I never believed that I would be able to watch every movie on my phone.
True.
So,
but what's wrong? Essentially wrong that these guys are doing it. That these guys believe the stuff they believe. What makes them different? Because
right, so
I find it perfectly all right if somebody there believes in UFOs. I don't care.
Right.
So what does it make that different that Zuckerberg believes shit like that?
Right. Well, first of all, it could happen, but second of all, I think it does reflect. It reflects a certain understanding of the human being. Again, it's this idea that we're going to be completely merged with this machine. In a way in which it actually literally, like, instead of using data to try to anticipate what we think, it would actually understand what we think. And this is a core problem. So human beings have always had tools, and those tools, like technology is really one of the things that defines us as a species, that we can create things to improve our environment, and to alter our environment in ways that allow us to do impressive things. But these machines are different because they're intellectual machines, that they stand between us and news, they help us process reality, they create virtual realities, and you're not just merging with the machine. We're not talking about hammers, we're not talking about plows, we're not talking about factories that automate upper body strength. We're talking about machines that automate intellectual capabilities, and we're not just merging with machines, we merge with the companies that operate the machines. And so if Mark Zuckerberg wants to read your brain, he wants to do that in order to manipulate you, in order to increase his profit. It also reflects an idea about privacy that I don't think needs a whole lot of spelling out, but just how can you? I mean,
But is it mainly because the people with these ideas have become so hugely successful with their companies, that they've become monopolists, and that they're dealing with all that knowledge that we are connected with all day, and they own those machines.
right.
And that's what I.
Right. Yes. So this is the other problem, which is that power has become extremely concentrated. That these companies are able to, because of their size, because of the way that they've situated themselves in our informational universe, in our economic universe, really turns out in our political universe as well, they're able to exert enormous control over what information people see, what products that they buy, and in a democracy, it's really problematic to have private power so concentrated, especially when it really doesn't have to obey any real rules about how it wields its power.
And what you say in your book is that particular power not only drives out competition, because that's what actually monopoly does, but it also installs conformism and collectivism.
Yeah.
And actually kills creativity.
Right.
Silicon Valley, in my idea, what you read in the books are guys in backyards with sheds, tool sheds, where they make up the most grand ideas. I actually interviewed Sergey Brin once, who came up with a story like that, and it was fantastic. These guys are so happy and so creative.
Yeah.
But you say actually they kill creativity.
Right.
Because of their all grand scheme of collectivism.
Right.
How does that work?
Right. Well, ironic.
I mean, you've shown me, you've shown shed a little bit of light on it, because what you said about what happened at the New Republic, you're all forced to a certain way of making journalism,
right,
or how to go about data.
Right. So I think this goes back to so one of the foundational beliefs of Silicon Valley is the network, that everybody needs to be part of one system, and that one system is both beautiful because it's a thing that ties us all together into a global community. It creates a common space for humanity. But there's a problem with it, which is that when you have these big units where we're all drawn in, it means that the rules that they set for those units become the rules that we all have to essentially abide by. But also, in their vision, there's this offloading that happens where, part of the beauty of their systems is that they're making life, they view themselves as making life more frictionless, more easy for you. So some of this is great. Like, I'm happy that Google can get me from point A to point B. I don't really need to have a sense of direction. I'm happy to have Google showing me the way to do that. But some of it becomes, they start to chip away. There's this risk that they start to chip away at your free will, at your individuality, as they start to...
Frictionless doesn't mean to say that Amazon has to be stopped. That's not frictionless. Frictionless is also not competitionless.
Right.
Competition is friction.
Right. So we look at Silicon Valley, we say these guys are libertarians, and they are libertarians, but they also have this vision of collectivism. And so when I was listening, I mean, really, you see it in the rhetoric. Media, it's social media, it's crowdsourcing, it's network, it's collaboration. It's this idea that we're all working together as part of one unit. And that means that I think that this fetish that they have for one, for the whole, for the collective, means that they just become profoundly insensitive when it comes to the prerogatives of the individual. And so that's why they just can't understand the importance of privacy at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. It's why they...
But let's get back first to that collectivism, because that's fascinating, because how can that happen in the United States of America?
Well,
It sounds like bloody Russia, or
Right.
how can a country that's so profoundly competitive and all about meritocracy, about getting best out of yourself, how can it be so? How can that particular part of the United States be so? Be all about that part of thinking that
Well, we
you
need
just
to
described.
answer that question. We need to journey back to California in the 1960s, and so the area that we call Silicon Valley, it's the south of San Francisco, on the peninsula there, and it was the place that gave us the Grateful Dead, LSD, Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. At the same time, it gave us Apple Computer and the internet and these new tech companies. And it wasn't an accident that that these two things grew up side by side. I mean, it's really impossible to imagine these inventions without the spirit of the counterculture, because the big tech companies of the 1950s and 60s existed on the East Coast, and they were very bureaucratic, very tied into the Pentagon, really stodgy, really protective of IBM was protective of the monopoly that it had. And so in the late 60s, all these people end up disappearing to communes, which is a beautiful dream. This idea that it's utopian. It's utopian in like the precise sense of the term, where they went to communities and they tried to have a new relationship to one another, to the land, to have kind of an ecological understanding of the way that the world functioned. And they failed. The communes end up disbanding after a couple years. But that spirit of the commune was something that the early technologists really believed in, and they thought that technology could be the way to achieve the dreams that the communes couldn't. And so
And that's what you find at Googleplex, for instance, or at Apple. When
you see
Jobs was
traces
there,
of
yeah.
it. You see traces of it. I mean, it's really, I mean, I was just, if you start to think about the way that the office structure is idealized in Silicon Valley, which has then been transmitted into the rest of the world, it's this idea everybody dresses the same. Mark Zuckerberg wears the same hoodie as the engineer across the room who's coding. They all sit in an open office where there are no doors, and Zuckerberg's desk is the same size as everybody else's. And these are gorgeous ideas. They're really lyrical, they're really beautiful, except when the network or the commune gets captured by a firm. And because these networks represented the biggest, best business opportunity in human history, it was almost inevitable that people would try to monetize the internet. They would try to capture the firm. And there's this theory in Silicon Valley that there's really no room for number two. Once the
Winner takes all.
Winner takes all. Once the network is captured, you have the network effect.
Metcalfe's law.
Metcalfe's law. And so it's not even worth investing in a second
How does it
place.
sound again, Metcalfe's law? I've actually written it down somewhere. Just let me see where I can find it. Well, no. Oh yeah, there we go. Metcalfe's law states that the value of a telecommunications network is proportional to the square of the number of connected users of the system. So goes proportionally. Well, that's
right. So Facebook is okay when it's just connecting you and me. It's a lot better when it's connecting everybody in this room. But if it's connecting everybody in the planet, it becomes infinitely more valuable.
Is that also what makes these particular monopolists different from the old school monopolists we used to know, like AT&T or Standard Oil, except for the fact, of course, that they mess with knowledge, right. but also structure-wise?
Well, structure-wise, the network has always been the justification for monopoly. So if you're the phone company, it really only makes sense to have a phone system that connects everybody. Otherwise, there are people who are going to be left out, or they're going to be clunky switching points in the network. And also, they argue the infrastructure of the network kind of demands that one company make all these big investments in it, because the investments are in getting a railroad system built or getting a phone system built are so substantial that that you deserve to be rewarded with monopolistic rents once you've made those sorts of investments. So there's a very interesting way in which the rhetoric of Silicon Valley actually tracks very, very closely with the rhetoric of the robber barons or AT&T or IBM. None of them like the idea of competition.
Which is strange in America.
But
But then again, it has a long tradition, the monopolies in the United States. Let's go to the basic essence of these tech companies and what's in their core, which is very opaque, the algorithm. Most notably Zuckerberg, Facebook, he advocates radical transparency. Where in fact the opposite is the case, where it comes to his formula, his algorithm.
Yeah.
So explain to the people first, what is an algorithm really? And what importance does it have for a company like Facebook, but also a company like Google? What does it mean?
Well, algorithm is actually a very ancient concept. It's not, even though it develops out of mathematics, it was named for a 12th century Arab mathematician. It's not exactly a mathematical concept. It's a procedure that you create in order to orchestrate a process. So the process that we use for long division, is an algorithm. There's a number of steps that you take, and you have to follow precisely in order to get the result. The algorithm doesn't tell you what the result's going to be, but it tells you that if you follow these things, you're going to get the result that you want. And so it's an ancient concept, but it became, everybody started talking about it a couple years ago for a reason, which is that companies were the price of computing suddenly dropped. So if I wanted to store massive, massive amounts of data, I could do so incredibly cheaply, which is why these companies have become so powerful. They don't get rid of any shard of information. It's all collected. And then algorithms, these procedures, become the basis for them sorting that information. And so they can, if they figure out what is it that you like, there's a series of kind of simplified ways they can reduce that into something that is this procedure. And then they can take that massive, massive amount of data and they can start to sort it in that sort of way. Or they can find the patterns. This is how they know what you want. So they have all your data sitting there on the server, and they can have their patterns have their algorithms look for the patterns in that data. So, it turns out there's a correlation between rainstorms and people buying Pop-Tarts at the store. Right?
But it's perfectly fair then.
Yeah, so there's nothing, algorithms are great. They're beautiful. I have some theoretical problems with it, but more or less I agree with you. There's nothing wrong with those things, except for the fact that most human beings are unaware of them when it comes to Facebook. So when I read Facebook, when you read Facebook, maybe we know that that your information is being sorted. But a lot of people read Facebook and they think it's just their friends sharing information with them. But in fact, it's not. Facebook is constantly creating a hierarchy of information. It's saying this information is more relevant to you, important to you than that information. And the reason they do that is because they want you engaged. They want you to spend as much time as possible on their site. And so
that's also in the algorithm.
That is the algorithm. Yes, the algorithm is sorting your news in order to deliver this result.
So it mirrors the creator, really, the algorithm.
It mirrors the priorities of the creator.
Yeah.
And so Facebook says right now, we want video to be the first thing that you see when you open up Facebook. And so it will sort the information in order to put the videos at the top. Or it says, we know there's an election happening, and we can see that our readers are responding a lot to news that makes them outraged. So we'll have that be elevated by the algorithm. And the problem is that the algorithm is invisible, but it's also incredibly powerful in Facebook's realm, because it's basically making the decisions about what news you read, about the things that, and essentially they're running an emotional experiment on you. I mean, they're saying, and they've done this explicitly at moments where they've tested how you respond to news, how they can manipulate your emotions. If they put you in a happier frame of mind, are you more likely to stay on their site at any given time? If they put you in a foul frame of mind, are you going to be driven from their site? And so there's this, the algorithms are constantly, they store the information, they learn from the information, which kind of produces a new set of procedures, which are then applied. This is why it's called machine learning, and it's a branch of artificial intelligence, and it's incredibly...
So it's a grandiose laboratory.
Yeah, you are...
And we are part of that.
You are guinea pigs in their lab experiment.
And that is also why, and that experiment especially, it's also owned by a company. It's a company-owned experiment.
They're experimenting with you in order, and this is, to go to the thing I said at the very beginning, my concern is about your attention. My concern is about your ability to contemplate the world. And so basically they're running experiments in order to capture more and more of your attention, to keep you on their site for a longer period every day. They're running experiments in order to supply you with the information not that you need, not that will make you better citizens, but this information that you'll keep coming back to use the food metaphor again, like that bag of potato chips, where you crave the salt, the sugar, and the fat.
So, but why can't you oppose that? Like, why couldn't you have opposed that from? You mentioned the Dorito snack. Your new owner, your investor, wants you to produce at one stage at the New Republic, but one can do exactly the opposite.
Well, I can't say that. I mean, first of all, I mean, to excuse myself on that question, I didn't really fully understand it at the time. I mean, I was learning it as I went along, and I wasn't from within the system, and so, but also this is part of the problem, is when you become dependent on a system, as journalism has been dependent on Facebook, you're able to convince yourself to make compromises, like I described.
Yeah.
That, okay, I'll do this, I know it's not great, but I'm also able to do this thing that I think is important, so the thing that I think is important can justify the thing that I think is maybe pernicious.
So that's what you mean in your book, where you write that the Silicon Valley has infiltrated our profession.
Yes.
You were at that time infiltrated, basically, by the whole concept of algorithms, about the idea of using data as a main driver of publishing.
Yeah, exactly. So it was hard for me to understand at the time, but it was the things that Facebook wanted were the things that I set out to provide, and I hadn't really fully understood that, but it's a form of infiltration. Yes.
And that's basically the race for clicks and a race for clickbait.
Right.
The snacks, the Doritos.
Yeah, it's a race. It's a race for popularity. Let me give you an example, which was that there was a hunter from Minnesota who posted a picture on Facebook where he was standing on top of a lion that he'd shot. Well, it turns out he was boasting about having killed a lion called Cecil.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and let me just be clear. I think killing lions is terrible. But Cecil was a celebrity lion. He was like the Kim Kardashian of lions or something. and the fact that this lion died produced, a lot of outrage, rightly so. But it also it became this thing that if you were in journalism, you saw that it was becoming popular. And so you knew you had to write about it. Not because it was worth writing about, but because that wasn't the process. Because you knew that it would generate traffic. You knew that it would make you successful. You knew that audiences...
Who said that? in your organization? Who said we're going to write about Cecil?
The
now?
data
said it.
The data said it. It was like Facebook provides the key term on Facebook is trending, and there's a whole variety of tools that you have to. There's something called CrowdTangle. There are other analytic devices that you have to see the things that are in the process of becoming popular and ubiquitous. And the reason you have data is in order to tap into that popularity as it begins to crest. And so Cecil the Lion generated 3.2 million stories. There were 3.2 million stories written about Cecil the Lion. And what that shows me is the way in which something like Facebook, on one level, it's true, it's individualized. I can express my opinion on Facebook. I can brag about the fact that I'm getting interviewed by you tonight on Facebook and post a picture of that, and people will like it, and I'll feel good about myself. But Facebook, at the same time that it allows for individual expression, also has this powerful push to the median, to make us huddle around the same thing. Because what's in a global village?
The bubble.
In a global village, you have. I mean, the reason that you need to be connected is to be part of a conversation. I mean, this is almost the theory of Facebook, that they want us to join one conversation where we're all tied together. And so that's a very powerful thing. If you can try to race into that one conversation, then you can reach audiences that are infinitely bigger than any audience that you'd had before.
So that was the bait.
That's the bait.
Going for those large audiences.
And let me just say
that's exactly what Chris Hughes was tapping into.
And it's, you know who else tapped into it? Donald Trump. I mean, I don't think that Trump had data or analytics or any real sophisticated understanding of any social media other than Twitter. But Donald Trump is Cecil the Lion. Donald Trump was somebody who started off as a joke. Nobody could take, no political reporter in the United States could have taken Donald Trump seriously when he started his campaign. He came from the world of entertainment. And people wrote about Donald Trump because they knew that people hated, like, if you're a liberal, easy way to make people outraged, this joker Donald Trump is running for president, let's make fun of him, let's give him attention in order to get clicks. If you're on the right, Donald Trump's saying horrible things that we really don't believe in about Barack Obama not being born in the United States. We think that's bullshit, but let's give him attention. And so the entire media universe basically conspired to get ratings and clicks by giving Donald Trump attention when they knew better. And I think the results speak for themselves.
Which means that the basic idea of the data and the whole basic concept as journalists becoming data whores has put Trump in power. I mean,
yes. Look, there are many reasons why Donald Trump ended up in power. I don't want to be glib in saying that's the reason that it happened. But the point is that citizens really can only be as good as the quality of information that they have. That we expect citizens to make very important decisions every couple of years. Mm-hmm. And if the quality of information is degraded, how can they make the right call? And if Facebook takes this trend of polarization was happening before Facebook, but it certainly helps nurture it. Because you have these two conformist sets that are constantly being fed information that confirms their biases. And when you live in that type of world where your bias is being confirmed all the time, and you suddenly start to see fake news, propaganda, you have a demagogue who's exploiting your emotions, you become weak. You become intellectually incapacitated in the face of that information. We no longer have a common basis for fact and conversation. I mean, the promise of Facebook is that you have one conversation, but really you have two or three or four conversations that are happening where there's a high degree of conformism happening within those conversations, And as a result of that conformism, people no longer trust any idea of objective news, any expert opinion.
Well, then again, since Trump, since Cecil, the lion, Trump, magnificent things have happened to the New York Times and Washington Post. They call it the Trump bump. They have had many more, hundreds of thousands more subscriptions. So one could also say that because of that development, because of Trump, and it also happened before he was elected, as a matter of fact, serious quality press has gained momentum again.
Well, we can all applaud the New York Times heavily when they win their Pulitzer after we die in World War III with North Korea. No, I think that good things have happened after the election. That there has been a bit of a revulsion against Trump that spurred people to new heights. One thing that's really fascinating to me is that...
But you don't see it as a fundamental movement. You say it's more of a drop on a hot plate.
That's my concern. I mean, there are genuine reasons for optimism. One reason is that news organizations like the New York Times have always hated Facebook, but they've played by its rules. And I think that there's this sense right now that they can maybe make a break for it, that they can run away from Facebook. And one way in which they've done that is that they've started to market their subscriptions with more confidence than they've ever done. They've advertised themselves as the antidote to fake news, which actually represents a degree of self-confidence that we haven't seen from them, a sense of purpose and mission we haven't seen from them in so long. Yeah, it is
because of Cecil the Lion, one might say.
Right. Well, that's a terrible bargain to have to accept. But
and there's more. Even Jeff Bezos, but he already owned that newspaper in, I remember, 2013, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
He bought the Washington Post, and he's doing well with the newspaper. So Bezos, as a person, as an owner of this monopoly, is he switching sides? Is he doing the right thing?
Well, to me, it's the if we're worried about economic power being concentrated in too few hands, we shouldn't really be too excited about that power becoming even more concentrated, even if he's presided over a newspaper that has very bravely challenged Donald Trump. I mean, again, journalists are narcissists, so we can see good things coming out of the Washington Post, but then again, that shouldn't be reason for us to suddenly put Jeff Bezos up on a pedestal and applaud him as being a virtuous human being. And also, there are very good reasons to worry ultimately about the fate of the Washington Post. I mean, there is this question of how will they cover Amazon as Amazon comes to shape every central economic question of our time. Will they succeed in being tough when it comes to
their owner?
When it comes to owner, yeah.
Right. Let's make some time for some questions from the. There you are. Can we have the microphone over here?
It's coming.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah. It's the lady in the second row.
Hello.
Hello.
Well, I agree with a lot of the things you say, but I think Facebook basically exploits some basic human psychology. And what the story with the lion, for example, that kept dragging here in the conversation, I think that says a lot about Facebook and the algorithm as much as it says about our human nature. Because what your discourse doesn't do is take into consideration the fact that we have agency, and it's not them versus us. I'm very skeptical to this kind of discourse that says them, they're doing us this, they're doing us that. There's no such thing. We accept, we click, we do this to ourselves. So, can you respond to that?
Yes, so, and in fact, I think if you read my book, you'll find that that like we're pretty much fundamentally in agreement that it's true. What happens with I agree with the first part of what you said, that really there are tendencies in human nature. Like our tendency is to join into tribes, right? Our tendency is to seek self-approval, to seek the approval of other people. Our tendency is to want to be like. All these things are very, very real. We also tend to be towards addiction too, but addiction is also a very real phenomenon. We see this with childhood obesity, right? I mean, it just as you can't blame people. You can't blame. Like, I don't know if you've read stories about places like Ghana or Brazil where dietary habits are disrupted. There's a tremendous amount of marketing that goes into the promotion of certain foods, and you can't just say, all these people who died of lung cancer because of tobacco, like they had the power to quit. I mean, there are powerful.
It's not the same, really. Actually, if I think about it, what happened.
Just a moment.
So, hello again. What happened to this doctor, for example, with your lion example, is because of us. We responded like a mob on the internet.
Yes.
It's our fault. So in the end, if you wrote a comment there and someone else did that too, nobody forced you to do it. That's different from not having a choice than to drink Coca-Cola because the water tap is taken away.
Okay, but
it serves your point, but it's not the same.
well, let me say that. There's one concept that I think is really important, which is the concept of the gatekeeper. So in the way that information is arrayed, which is the thing that fundamentally influences the shape of conversation, there's always somebody who makes a choice. So in a newspaper, it's the editor who makes that decision. And Follow the Money, it's Eric. And Eric decides what is going to be the thing that's going to be at the top of his website, that the thing that he's going to assign the most resources to, the thing that he's going to submerge below everything else because he considers it to be less important. And so it is this kind of quest for success that leads people to make that choice, to elevate certain information. And yes, you are correct. So let me get to the second point, which is to say human beings are part of the system. They have agency. It's complicated, right? I'm not saying that we are blameless in this situation. And in fact, much of my book in the latter parts is about how we need to take more responsibility for the state of our informational ecosystem, that we don't need to become as dependent on these platforms as we are. We don't need to sleep with our cell phones. We don't need to allow our cell phones to notify us all day long. We don't need to be on Facebook even, or in the way that we are. There's a guy in Silicon Valley.
So that's in fact where you come into action to say where we actually can alter things.
Right.
By our own choices, and that's exactly what you are saying.
Yeah,
basically.
no, I firmly believe that. There's a guy in Silicon Valley who I met when I was promoting my book called Tristan Harris. I don't know if anybody's come across him, but he had a company that was bought by Google, and Google made him something like its ethicist in chief was his title, that he had a background in philosophy and computer science, and he was part of design teams. And he ended up quitting Google, leaving Google, because he came to believe that the systems that were being created were so powerfully addictive, that they were leveraging data, they were thinking about things in a way that really didn't take into consideration human beings. And so he created an organization called Time Well Spent, which has a series of suggestions for how you can de-addict yourself from technology. So, among them with Facebook, one thing that he suggests is that instead of having it on your phone, you can have it on your laptop. And because what happens on the phone is that you get into this almost zombie state where you have time to kill. You don't even know what you're doing. You click on it. It's not a conscious process.
We become one with the technology.
Yeah, and then you end up scrolling. It happens in the middle of the night all the time. I mean, I find that if I end up with my phone in the middle of the night, I don't even know exactly what I do, but I know that I've spent a lot of time. This happened to me the other day with Lucia, my publicist here. She said, you checked WhatsApp at 3 in the morning. What were you doing? And I was like, I checked WhatsApp at 3 in the morning. There must have been a notification on my phone, and I woke up in the middle of the night and I checked it, and I also realized that I end up getting, you just end up
So you're
scrolling.
addicted. It's not completely free choice then. So something more needs to happen in order to break up the force and the power of...
Right, so this is another area where we obviously have agency. That even though these companies are powerful, but human beings are powerful too, and we also have a powerful instrument at our disposal, which is government. That I think Europeans have done a lot to advance the conversation on privacy, but really we're just at the beginning of reformulating our understanding of privacy, and we need.
Because in your book you said the monopolies should be broken up.
Well, that's the other thing, is that we need antitrust.
Antitrust.
We have a tradition of anti-monopoly that needs to be applied to these companies. We've lived in this suspended state of history for the last couple of decades where we just haven't really been concerned with the problem of monopoly. We haven't thought a lot about economic concentration. We used to think a lot about economic concentration, especially in the realm of information and communications.
Back in the AT&T days, you mean, telecommunications.
Sure,
yeah.
Or IBM
Yeah.
or Microsoft. I mean, the Microsoft case is one of the most underrated developments of the last 25 years. That the government stepped in to try to, it was poised to break up Microsoft.
Yeah.
And it didn't end up happening because of the Bush administration wrapping things up in kind of the shadow of 9/11. And that didn't, but really Microsoft was scared. And the terror that Microsoft felt meant that it had
They backed off.
They backed off. They had to treat the browser in a way that wouldn't invite government intervention. And I've talked to a lot of people at Google who say that if it weren't for the government's antitrust case, then Google would have been strangled in its crib.
So that's what we need. We need, in order to be able to break up and to let not likes of Google, Facebook, Amazon take control of our freedom, our democracy, or to make us complete addicts, we have to not only control ourselves a bit more, but we need to have strong government to break them up.
Yeah. That imposes checks on power.
So how do you visualize it?
It's very. Let me just say, I'm not an antitrust scholar. I'm not an economist, and these are tricky questions.
But I mean, let's break up Facebook in.
Well, I look at what the Europeans are doing with Google, and I see that the Europeans didn't really have a strong conceptual framework for having to deal with these companies. They had an instinct, a powerful instinct, but over time, it seems like they're groping towards a form of dismemberment. So this idea that you would create a search engine with Google that's separate from its advertising business, that would allow it to continue to make money off of search, but wouldn't allow it to dominate advertising. That seems like it's a way of breaking up a company that's a lot softer than maybe the way that we abstractly imagine a company getting split into pieces. But you could see Facebook having the same solution remedy applied to it.
In the end of your book, you also have a very romantic way of, disconnecting from the monopolists, and that's reading books, paper.
Yeah.
In a bath, preferably. Or
a warm bath.
A warm bath.
I know everybody. It's like people are chuckling because it seems like a quixotic suggestion. But when the ebook was introduced in 2008, everybody thought that its triumph would be inevitable. That there was Nicholas Negroponte, who runs the MIT Media Lab, said by the year 2015, there will no longer be paper books. But lo and behold, it's still here. E-book sales have plateaued. Every year,
Smells great.
Every year, paper book sales increase 2 or 3% now, and it's a pretty powerful example of how human beings have resisted the thing that's lower cost, more efficient, in favor of something that is probably more intellectually virtuous.
And it's also about returning to your own space, your own rest, your own freedom.
Right. Well, and it's also the history of reading is so fascinating because it is about the development of privacy. That when people started, when we had the first text, they were magic. They were literally magic. It was the word of God delivered by a priest who was literate to a congregation that was illiterate. And reading happened in public spaces. So you would go to a square and books would be read by storytellers. And over time, we had all of these developments. We had the advent of the printing press. We had the development of capitalism, which created professional classes, and literacy started to spread because we created new grammar, and as a result, people started reading to themselves. Reading used to almost universally be done aloud, but then we started reading to ourselves, where we didn't need to announce the words.
Silent.
It became silent, and we started reading in our private spaces. The places where people read tend to be their beds, the bath, a chair, and subconsciously, I loved the Kindle when it came out.
And it's also a great thought of being able to be a part of the resistance in a warm bath.
It's basically, I mean, what's better than that?
There's nothing better than that. Franklin, may I ask you?
Thank you.
Thank you for this conversation. Thank you very much. You can all join the resistance tonight by buying this book and even get it signed by Franklin, and also, of course, learn about what's in here. And it's a very important book, I must say. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for the conversation.
Franklin Foer en Eric Smit. Over 2 weken zijn we er weer met literatuur Late Night op dezezelfde plek. 3 november met Anniet van der Zijl en Emily Fokker onder leiding van Kees het Hart. Tot over 2 weken, zou ik zeggen. Dankjewel.